What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this week's Lumix Live. We've got some pretty fun stuff to talk about today. We're as the title says, primarily like the main piece of today's stream is talking about the LUMIX Tether software. Now, there's a little bit of a kind of want to getting back into talking about it. Because we were just at NAB and we were showing off some of the cool stuff that we've got with the software and how we were deploying it with an actual multicam kind of environment, especially when we talk about with the box cameras. But I'm also going to talk a little bit about, the usability for photographers, because that's primarily how I've used it when I'm not doing these kinds of streams. So we wanted to, kind of have that as kind of an anchor topic for today's stream. But also just, like always, these are open Q&A streams. So if you have questions about the Lumix cameras, if you've got questions about the software that you want to talk about, drop them in the chat. That's exactly what we're here to be doing and offering as an opportunity for everybody. A couple things to note. I have just recently updated and changed my microphone setup. I've gone from a cheapo Amazon special microphone that I had to actually a fairly decent Audio-Technica with a new preamp. So if audio seems a little off, please let me know in the chat. I've been able to do some testing ahead of time, but I want to make sure that this sounds pretty good for everybody too, since that is one of the things that we've always talked about too, audio being very important to the content that you're actually providing. So, cool. If you are new to these live streams, these are weekly broadcasts that we do every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. And the whole purpose of them is to provide technical information, to be able to, just give you some good feedback. Have some audio interference happening, buzzing. Ooh, that's not fun. Let me see here. I do hear that. Let's see here. Give me 2 seconds. Let's get this. I think I know what it is. We're going to change my setup here. Let's go properties. Let's change this to this. All right. Let's see if that may have fixed it. So, cool. Funny thing is, so that the buzzing actually isn't it might not be the cell phone. It may have actually just been my desktop. I just upgraded the computer and I've got oh, okay. Cell phone. There you go. I did just move that away from all the cables. So thank you. Hey, all the tiny little stupid things that happen here. So, all right, cool. Where was I? Yes. So if these are your first Lumix live streams, normally they don't start like this, but this is our weekly broadcast where we offer an opportunity for everyone to ask questions directly from directly to Panasonic and get answers. I do work for Panasonic. I'm one of the marketing people, and yeah, it basically gives us this opportunity to have this back and forth conversation. Typically during the shows, I'll have some sort of, kind of primary thing that I want to talk about, which, as I said today, is the LUMIX Tether software, and some of the cool stuff that we can do with it. But yeah, in general, we've got, actually a lot of really cool stuff, that we've done, on these platforms. If you have questions, make sure to tag at LUMIX Cameras before the question. I can see it come up on my side. And I'm able to, kind of actually see them throughout the broadcast. Couple last little things to talk about. If you've recently purchased a Lumix camera or you're interested in purchasing a Lumix camera, we always want to bring up about Lumix Pro Services. Lumix Pro Services is the platform that we have available for basically the support of your camera. If you want to make sure that you've got the best back-end support for your equipment, we offer 2 different levels here in the United States. We have the red tier as well as the platinum tier. The red tier is free. If you've purchased a Lumix camera recently, just go get yourself checked out on that. It's free. You can register at the QR code right there for the US team. Otherwise, if you're joining us from overseas or outside of the United States, there's the global link down in the description below. So be sure to go check that out. The red tier, like I said, is free. It gets you your 3-year extended warranty here in the United States. If you're also looking to get maybe a step up on that, that's where our Platinum tier service actually kind of steps in. The Platinum tier gets you all the same stuff that the Red tier does, but it adds a lot of extra benefits to it. You get a pretty cool welcome kit with a Peak Design strap, 2-day repairs with free next day shipping both ways, 20% off out of warranty repairs. So if you drop equipment or break it, you can get yourself some protection there and a little bit less of a hit if it's a break kind of repair through manufacturer. And then you also get sensor cleanings annually, EVF cleanings, all that kind of cool maintenance stuff that we usually need to have. And then last but not least, for those that actually prefer to speak to someone in person, you have access to the membership hotline. So if you need to actually speak to someone to troubleshoot something, we have that in the Platinum tier. Right now, I think the system to get into it, I think, is lowered down. So what it takes to get into the program. So go take a look, at least here in the United States, and you can get your stuff all set up and ready to go. What else? If you're not doing so already, follow us over on Instagram. We've got a lot of cool stuff going on over there, and it's one of the other places that I can continue the conversations. I also interact over on Facebook as well as over on Reddit as Sean at Lumix. So if you have questions, feel free to reach out. I try to get to answers as fast as I can through those separate platforms, but it might not be an instantaneous answer. So yeah, basically the main thing about today is talking about Lumix Tether. We've always talked about the general, use of Lumix Tether from primarily the videographer side, and it's definitely one of the cooler things that you can use when it comes to video production because you've got the ability to switch through cameras, change all your different settings. But what's cool is when you really pair it with the box cameras, you get that extra level of control with it. And there's some cool stuff that we got feedback from actual users out there during NAB that I wanted to kind of walk through and kind of show people just how this stuff actually seems to work a little bit better in the real world. So I'm going to pull up my stuff here. I'm going to bring this over here, bring this here, and then okay, we should be back now. Man, I'm just having a great day today, huh? Okay, so where was I? Yes. So, and Sacred, you're actually 100% right. That's exactly what it was. It did not have the audio set up in there. So, man, today actual live stream, so I can be seeing what exactly I've got going on out to, in this case, YouTube. I can see exactly what I've got going on with the cameras themselves or the camera. So that's in my top right here. And then I've also got, in this case, I've got Streamlabs open because I'm trying something different than OBS. Streamlabs seems to be a little more stable. So this gives me all the different views that I need for how I'm mixing this particular setup when it's a single person operation. So we've talked about some of this, the general control panel that we have. I can do everything from my white balance setup. I can adjust my aperture, my ISO, my shutter angle. In this case, right now we're on my main camera, so you can see up here in the top right. This is my main camera. So this is a BS1H. I've got my 24mm f1.8 on here. And I'm typically at this point, I'm usually either shooting at 4K 60 or 1080 60, depending on the camera. And with this particular setup, there's actually kind of a reason behind that. In some cases, I may actually have the camera set up as 1080-60 because I want to actually use pixel to pixel, crop in, things like that, like I'll show you in one of the other camera angles here. But all of that control is very hard if you're a single person operation and you've got cameras way out of reach. So as an example, if we look at that, so my main camera is the one, well, that's not going to help. My main camera is the one on the left side of your screen. So I have 3 separate camera angles set up on my particular broadcast right now. I've got the main one that we're looking at now. I've got a top down, so on my desk, so I can be able to, you know, show some equipment here. You can see, like, I've got a mag chassis of the camera. I've also got, you know, battery banks, stuff like that. So if I was trying to demonstrate something to you, I'd be able to just take a top down and show you. The cool thing with doing this, the actual video output through the, we can have tons of me on the screen here. The cool thing about doing this through like an ATEM is that I can be able to just basically have this set up, know that my main camera's in channel 1 or my input 1, and I can still do the overlay and make it a little bit simple if you don't want to dive into using something like OBS for a multicam stream. So yeah, that's my second camera angle. My third camera angle is a new angle, which is the one up here. Little funky. I've got, that's another BS1H. The overhead camera is a BGH1, but this is a BS1H that has an 11mm TT Artisan lens on here. So it's ultra wide, gets me a huge field of view, and kind of just for fun, it's a different lens to have on here. So I've got 3 different options here that I can be working with and be able to just actually change all of them. But to the point of that camera that's up top, that is the one that I can't reach, right? It is literally mounted to my ceiling. I've got an Ethernet run going to it, so it's being powered off the Ethernet, and then I've got an HDMI cable run down to my switcher so that I can have the input in with the rest of my setup. If I needed to change anything on that, even something as simple as if I needed to change the focal length on that particular setup, it's a nightmare because I would have to stop what I'm doing here, go up, change the lens, have it, you know, check on the screen, you know, what field of view I've got. Did I pick the right lens? What if I want to change something in the middle of a broadcast? Then it causes a lot of kind of headache. Now, we talked about this a couple weeks ago, actually, I think during the NAB recap, that this is where Lumix Tether's power really comes in with the cameras that we have. So I'm going to switch back to my screen here, and I'm going to change my Lumix Tether control software to be working with the top-down camera. So the way we do that is, in the Lumix Tether software, you've got the option to select camera. So I'm going to click camera, and you're going to see that I've got 3 cameras attached to my system, like we've shown. I've got my main front-facing camera, which you can see in your top right. I've got my overhead camera that when I click on this, you'll see that that will change over to my overhead camera in the top right. And then I've also got, if I click again, you can see that I have now my side cam, the side angle camera here. And for those asking, this is an LG C1 48-inch OLED that I picked up for a really nice price, and it's gorgeous to work on. So I've got all 3 of my different angles here that I can work with. So let's focus on the top-down shot. So we're going to go and change my inputs to the top-down camera angle. And when it comes to lensing for some of this stuff, you know, typically on these 2 cameras, on the 2 BS1Hs, they're fixed focal length lenses. They're primes. I've got like I said, I've got a 24 1.8, and then I've got that 11mm TT Artisan fisheye lens. But the top camera, my top-down shot, the one that you see here, that is running a very different lens than we would normally see. That really kind of is only starting to get popularity more recently now. So that's running the 45 to 175mm power zoom lens. Now, the reason that we're running this is that it gives us a number of really cool things that we can do with that particular setup. So if we look in the top right here, and I'm going to make this actually a little bit bigger so y'all can see it. So if we're looking at this setup right here, we'll see that I've got, you know, just a basic frame. But say I don't like the way this is mounted because it's kind of on an angle, or say I really want to get in here and take a look at, say, this battery. I want to be able to go in and say, this is what we're talking about today, but I don't have the ability to maybe make this tighter, and I don't want to do it through software. So what you do is with these power zoom 45 to 175 millimeter lens that we have, you have direct control in Lumix Tether to be able to go in and actually power zoom this lens in. Now, I didn't set this up. I do not believe this is a parfocal lens. So I can come in here, I can set my focus on it, and now I've got, you know, a tighter shot on here so that we can actually be maybe demonstrating, like, you know, talking about, you know, this particular battery. So this is the BLK22. So we could be talking about just what's so cool about this battery, right? Now, when I flip this over and let's go to the main shot. So we've got myself here. I can go here. We're looking at that actual camera angle. I can throw myself up in the corner. This makes it super easy for me to always have a preview of what my next shot's going to be if I'm setting it up this way. And I don't necessarily have this, you know, kind of organized where I'm monitoring out right off of the switcher if I want to make this super, super easy. Now, where this becomes actually a lot cooler is you can see in that shot that it's relatively dark, right? You know, when I zoom in, the aperture is actually stopping down. If we look, that aperture dropped down to 5.4 because it's a variable aperture lens. I've got 4000 ISO right now on this. I'm doing 4K 60p. It's at 420 10-bit. Well, Lumix Tether allows me to come in and say, all right, I want to take this and I want to change the resolution of that camera. So I want to come up here and say, I want to make this, let's do some filtering. Let's change this to 1920 by 1080. My frame rates are always going to be 60 frames per second because that's how I work here. Now, when I go in here, I can change, all right, let's go full HD 60p 10-bit. Click it in here. So now the camera is set up as 10-bit and full HD 60p, but that didn't change anything. That's where being able to go into the actual camera menu becomes a huge benefit here with the Tether software. I can now come in, click on the camera option, go into my rec quality, and I want to be able to punch in much further on this sensor. So I can use image area video, change this to pixel, and now when I back out, you see how much closer I am to that image because I'm not using the full sensor width. I'm using now a pixel-to-pixel readout. And what that means is that I had my normal camera angle here, and we were looking at that before. But if I change over to shot number 2, and we're going to talk about the exposure in a moment. So I've got the camera here. I've got myself in the frame here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here, and I'm going to jump between pixel to pixel and full. So there's full. There's pixel to pixel. So I can get myself that much more reach without necessarily needing a power zoom lens on this. It gives me on-the-fly flexibility to change this stuff. But further than that, like we said already, this image it's really dark, and I don't have any of my lights unpacked from the last trade show, so I want to be able to make this brighter. Well, I can just easily come in with the software, and if I go back to my main shot, jump into here, I can go back into my software here, and I can just adjust my ISO. Now, because we're doing this as a live stream, this is a YouTube compressed live stream broadcast. I'm not doing this as a high-end cinema production. All of my cameras are set at like 709 for color profile. I don't need the ability to necessarily go in and shoot and log to color correct this stuff, right? I'm able to actually go in here and I can shoot typically at higher ISOs than you would normally think that you want to shoot at because YouTube compression is going to crush down some of the noise. So let's say I set this to 12,800 ISO, right? Looks better on the preview screen through Lumix Tether. But now if I go back to my main shot, jump in here and bring myself up here, you'll see that it's better. Would this be perfect for every environment and every exact situation? Not necessarily. Sometimes you are going to want to keep a much lower ISO, but in scenarios where you need to be able to very quickly jump through, get something set up, You want that extra little, punch in on something and know that you've still got at least the resolution that you're broadcasting in, since the vast majority of people are going to be doing YouTube or live streaming in 1080 or even 720. You've got way more flexibility when you're using this kind of stuff to actually add to that extra level. And I'm not even fully zoomed in with this lens either. I can bring this in even a little bit closer to where if I turn the battery so you guys can actually read it. So now, like, we're here, we're looking at the battery. If I flip it over and actually, again, go to where you guys can actually read it, I can actually be giving a conversation and demonstration about how this stuff works. I don't have to necessarily be, kind of doing it with a tiny little thing. I don't necessarily have to be going to where, you're doing the hold up to a camera thing and blocking your face. I can actually use the technologies that we have to give me more flexibility in the type of content that I'm actually producing and showing people. Let's take a look at some of the questions before we continue on here. So, past all the audio questions. All right, so one of the first questions that came in was from Alan. It says, hey, gonna get a question in early. Will audio monitoring come to Lumix Tether, or is it there and I've already missed it? So, audio monitoring, I don't believe is coming to Lumix Tether because, I shouldn't say that. I don't know if it can come to the software. For one, the USB protocols that are used, to my understanding, do not support audio transfer. That's why if you're using, say, like Lumix webcam software, the software that lets your computer pick it up as a webcam, that doesn't support audio transfer. Ethernet, because I think how Lumix Tether is pulling the information over the Ethernet, I think it's the same way. It's not pulling audio. So audio monitoring, to my understanding, is not coming, but it is something that we can ask and bring up. I know that that's kind of like the default thing is I'll ask and check. But I'm fairly certain that that's one that may not be coming, just because it's just not necessarily something that's there. Audio monitoring, for the most part, I typically do separately, but I can see where it may be useful through the software. Let's see here. More questions. Let's see here. Hey, Sean, I just registered my S5 bundle, but there's no warranty extension to be seen other than the standard 2-year. Registered from Germany, so I don't know if it's a US thing. Yeah, so that's probably a US, just the region thing. The 3-year extended warranty is part of the US Lumix Pro Services. By default in the US, cameras come with a 1-year warranty, but we offer, and all the cameras, as long as you register, you get 3 years extended. So that's a US thing. I'm not sure what Germany does. I think there are some other benefits you get when you register through with Germany. Yeah, so that would be most likely what that is. Let's see here. Daniel says, are Panasonic lenses that weren't purchased in the US serviceable by Lumix Pro Services? So my understanding, I believe, is that if the lens was purchased within a country that is part of Lumix Pro Services, it may be serviceable. But that is something that would have to be checked with Lumix Pro Services themselves. I'm not 100% up to date on what the actual the region side of that is to, where something's purchased, what its warranty status is. I know that typically if you purchase an item outside of the United States and you need to get it serviced in the US, we do not support that service. You would have to, I believe, go back to the country of origin that you purchased it from to get it serviced. And that's fairly common across the board. So yeah, I would check with Lumix Pro Services if you have it. Like I said, it's a free program to get in, so you submit the serial numbers and the items that you have, and they'll let you know the status there. Let's see here. Albert asks, haven't used Streamlabs yet. How do you like it so far versus OBS? So far it seems to be going okay. It's OBS underneath. It's just a different skin for it, like if you're primarily doing video game streaming, but it seems to be working pretty nice right now. Let's see here. Okay, so I answered the monitor. DJ Electric, time for power zooms, question mark? Yes, power zooms are useful. Yeah, I would love power zooms, more power zooms. If you guys have recommendations for them, I believe we said that on the NAB show, was let us know if there are certain focal lengths that are really valuable to you that you'd like to see as power zooms, and we can get that information into our engineers for lenses. At that point, I don't have any ability to give you a promise that more power zooms could come. But if you let us know what the desire is in the market, that allows us to bring that information to the team. Let's see here. Martin, I have a GH6, GH5S, G9 to record 3 separate angles. Challenge I have is to stop recording simultaneously in all 3. I have to run around and manually press the buttons. Any plan to extend multicam support to the GH6, GH5S range? So I don't know if the GH5S has the hardware needed to do multicam. So as an example, if you had a GH5 Mark II, you can do multicam support on a GH5 Mark II because that camera can allow you to connect over Ethernet. So you can plug in a bunch of them, connect them over Ethernet, and you get yourself set up that way. You can mix cameras, so I could have a GH6 attached into the computer over USB, my 3 BGH or my 1 BGH1 and my 2 BS1Hs, and all of them can show up and I can flip through. You would still have to, at that point, HDMI out. Typically, at that point, HDMI out to a switcher. The box camera's a nice benefit is at least you have SDI, so if you need really long runs, you can do it that way. But as far as the GH6 goes, I'm honestly not sure. I've asked, I know that the LUMIX Tether software got an update to add the GH6 into the camera, but that camera doesn't have the wireless functionality or the USB tethering functionality that the GH5 has. It's something we'd have to check with the engineers to see, can it do it? One of the things to remember with the GH6, though, is that it's a totally new engine and a totally new sensor. So certain things that we may think are super easy to deploy because we have them in existing cameras kind of goes out the window because it's a totally new architecture, a totally new processor. So things have to basically be not started over, but it's not as easy as just plug and play for certain things over. So yeah. In a case like that, Martin, like if you are doing multicam, like if you find that you're doing heavy amounts of multicam, I know it's more expensive, but I highly recommend just the right tool for the job. I know that that's kind of it's an easy thing for me to say because I have access to all these things. But the amount of flexibility you get because you have a camera that's designed for it, if you're doing multicam stuff, and if it's a big enough portion of the work you're doing, to me kind of offsets and makes a really good business investment decision. But that's from my perspective. I'm not running any of your businesses. I have no idea what makes most sense for you guys. So let's see. Sacred City, this is cool. Like those Louis Rossmann repair videos when he did board repairs. Yeah, I mean, some of the logic with, when you're looking at some of these other YouTube channels out there, Louis Rossmann comes to mind, which I love watching his stuff. I think it's so cathartic watching board repair, whether it's him or any of the other team doing it. But even stuff like Jerry Rig Everything, watching his videos because he's got that top down. There's a lot of cool stuff where if you've got just a simple setup and you need to be able to make a bunch of changes, you can cut that headache out of, one, either having to mount the camera so low that it's just out of frame, which can cause a little bit of a challenge anyway. It gets a little bit more difficult for lighting. But with these kinds of options, being able to use a power zoom lens and have a camera mounted literally on a ceiling, as an 8-foot ceiling, means that I've got that flexibility to go in and make my adjustments and not really have to do anything. I can do it live while I'm actually talking to people. It doesn't take any kind of extra time out of the stream just to go make a small little change. Let's see here. Alan says, USB can handle any data that you give it. Nothing to stop audio and video. As mentioned before, webcams that do USB do this. No, maybe there was a little bit of a misunderstanding in the way I said it. Definitely, yes. USB can handle audio and all that stuff. I mean, the preamp I'm using for the new microphone, that's powered and sending over USB also. I just don't know if the cameras can do it or set up. Because one of the things to remember is that the cameras, USB streaming and video output was a thing that basically really quickly escalated at the beginning of the pandemic because there was a need for people to want to use their cameras for that stuff. So I think it's something that we've definitely asked to take a look at, see, is it something that's doable? Is it a processor limitation? Is it just because cameras weren't typically designed to work that way, at least in the existing architecture? But it is something that we can ask and see. I just don't know if the existing equipment that's out there has hardware to do it. I don't know of any interchangeable lens camera company that has the ability to do audio over USB combined with video for a tethering software. I know some, I believe at least one or two of them may have USB like dongles that you can buy that are breakouts for it. But in a lot of cases like that, they typically have to be designed from day one to do that, to make sure that the processors can do it. Not saying that it's out of the question, just saying that at this moment, I wouldn't think that it's going to be something quick and easy to add to it. So let's see here. FC, will audio monitoring be possible if 3.5 millimeter cable from the headset output of camera to 3.5 millimeter audio input of PC? Yeah, you could do that. If you've got, say, like a Elgato HD60 or something like that, that has like a 3.5 millimeter, and I mean, you can use the HDMI in or pass through if you wanted, that would recognize as a line in to the camera. So you could very easily work around this, at least at this point. The audio monitoring side, if you're doing multicam like this and you want to control them with the cameras, you could very easily just be running 3.5 from the cameras along with the bundle for, say, SDI or the Ethernet to a location where you've got an audio monitoring setup. At that point, it's also probably going to be more accurate if you're doing it that way. You're going to have a higher quality coming out, or you could be sending it into a recorder and be recording another track of audio. Yeah, because at that point, you're plugging it into the headphones. So you could do that. And then some of the other cool things is that you would still actually be able to have the ability to say, I want to come in here. I want to check my headphone volume. I can check all of that. I can set it whether I want rec sound or real-time sound, because that would all just be the 3.5 millimeter headphone out for this. So yeah, that's something you could do. Let's see here. Alan says, audio monitoring may be a niche case. In our case, where we have multiple cameras around with a venue running independent live streams with audio straight into the cameras. Okay. I see what you mean. Yeah. So if you're trying to monitor and you can't necessarily be in one central location, that definitely could be something there. I think depending on the setup, from the years that I did some wedding, it was photography at the time, but I know that some of the videographers, they weren't really doing multicam setups, but depending on how big the environment is, I know audio cables you can run fairly long if you've got good ones. You might be able to do it that way, where you could have all the audio cables, all the headphone outs going into a single, or like a mixer, and then, you know, be connected into that to monitor them. It's a little more janky than, you know, maybe the rest of the ways you can do it. But as far as being able to do it through the software, it is something that we will bring up and see if it's possible. Yeah. Let's see here. FC says, power zoom that allows adjusting zoom speed like the way focus angle adjustment would be nice. That would be a pretty cool idea. Trinity Media says, how about making a 2870 f2.8 with a 67mm filter thread, small form factor, weather sealed version, to compete with the Sigma version? The Sigma seems really popular with the S5 users. I mean, from lenses, that there always seems to be some of that like question, right? Whenever like multiple 50 millimeters come out, the internet users tend to go out and they're like, what, another 50 millimeter? I think in general, if you look at the L mount as a whole, there are a lot of overlapping lenses that you have, different, cost levels for them, different, focus features between them. When you start to go to really small, tinier lenses, especially in full frame, you start to run into some of the other challenges, like what kinds of motors can you put in them to make them linear? What's the cost going to be? Downsizing electronics does cost more typically, so you end up running into the design challenges of making smaller things. It's not out of the realm of possibility for us to come out with something like a 28 to 70 2.8. We have the 24 to 70 2.8. But what I'd say is that there's definitely, I would say most would agree that there are other lenses that would make more sense to see first before you start seeing refreshes in the lineup, or more duplication of focal lengths even within their own brand. So yeah, at this point, we can pass it on. I wouldn't really put it as a really high probability of seeing something like a 28 to 70 2.8 with a 67mm filter thread. But yeah, we can ask. Let's see here. Henry says, no new S-Series camera in 1.5 years. Is S-Series dead? We don't even have rumors. Well, for one, rumors are pointless. Rumors are just rumors. I could make up a rumor. You could make up a rumor. Anybody could make up a rumor. Doesn't mean anything. But not having a new camera in a year and a half, I think in the industry we've gotten into that kind of like point where we think that cameras need to be updated every single year because we've been trained to think that there's a reason to do that. I would put out to the community, would you rather cameras updated just for the sake of updating them, or have camera updates that are actually, kind of substantial, have an actual reason to have an updated camera? I think as tech heads, we all definitely get very caught up in the next best thing. I do it with computers. I do it with cameras too, but working for a company alleviates, that gear acquisition for me. But yeah, at one point, it's look at the equipment you have. Is it holding you back to creating something? Just because the next, new camera is going to come out, and yeah, there's going to be new cameras that come out. We've talked about it. The systems are always continually evolving, and we're always adding new things to them. So the S-Series is definitely going to have more options, but there's just not really any. Looking at what could be added, what needs to be added, what needs to be refined, things like that. Those, I think, are much better conversations to have than necessarily like, oh, there's not one in 1.5 years or 2 years. As much as I want all of you to buy the next camera that comes out, the next greatest thing, I'd be just as happy if you pick up more lenses too. Cameras, when we do update cameras, if you look at our track record, especially when we're in the premium series cameras, we update cameras for reasons. And we add new things to the cameras that either previous generations couldn't do, or we add just new features, new architectures, things like that. Yeah, stuff like that is really what's gonna happen, I think, as cameras move forward. You may not see such a massive turnover of unit year over year. Don't let that scare people. Don't let that scare you. Your camera's still perfectly good. It's still gonna work. Just because a new camera comes out, or just because it may take a little bit longer than we see others maybe in the industry coming out with at a rapid pace. We definitely take much more of we want a substantial, kind of upgrade in a camera when you have new things come out. Look at how long the GH5 took to update to the GH6, and there's a massive architecture change there too. So, yeah. Yeah, that's probably about as much as I can talk about that before I just keep going on and on. Let's see here. Do you have any insight on upcoming firmware updates on the S-Series? Not that I'm missing anything on my S5, but new features didn't know of that I needed are always welcome. Not really anything on the S5. Even if I did know, I wouldn't be able to talk about it. I think some of the cool stuff about the S5, this is like that perfect period, I'd say, where look at the cameras, because we are in that kind of like lull period, right? We just had the GH6. The S5 is still a super sweet camera to work with. I'm willing to bet the vast majority of users of the camera are maybe only really using like 10% of what the camera can do. If you've ever wanted to play around with, say, like star trail photography, capturing, the circular star trails in the sky, or you want to start playing around night photography, even if you're into video. I fully understand the vast majority of our viewers are video-based users. Take a look at some of the features that like your S5 has. The Live View composite feature. It's the only full frame camera that offers that feature right now, to my knowledge. Put an asterisk there. To my knowledge, as of today, that is the only camera that I know of that has Live View composite built in. That'll get you things like a raw still, and does the composition that you would be doing, in software to get a star trailed image. If you want to be doing stuff like high resolution shot modes, playing around with that, the S5's got some really cool stuff there. Play around with slow and quick mode in the camera. Firmware updates always do come eventually. It's a matter of just timing, what could be coming up next, what's, what the timelines are. That's really the thing that comes in. So at the moment, nothing on firmware or anything like that. But I would highly encourage people to just start playing around with some of the features that you may have never known before. Even some of the time-lapse stuff, too. Let's see here. Martin says, I meant to use Bluetooth to trigger wirelessly to recording using Lumix Sync app to connect multiple cameras. P.S. I don't run businesses. Okay, yeah. One thing you could try to trigger all the cameras at once is if there is a Bluetooth like remote that allows you to have multiple dongles. That might work. But I know that the Sync app can only connect to one camera at a time, or the Image app can only connect to one at a time. The Tether software does let you select all cameras and trigger all at once. So you do have an option with the Tether software, but with your 3 cameras, they're not compatible for that. So yeah, it would be something with, really looking at some sort of Bluetooth trigger would probably work. Let's see here. Sacred says, Aries don't update every year. Only Red and Sony does that. Also, no one... well, I'm not going to say that. No. There is a lot of good stuff that the different companies do. I would never besmirch the name of another brand. There's no reason to. Or any of the other cameras. But yeah, just look at the different update cycles. You get a good idea of how stuff goes. Nick, were you able to raise to the engineers the possibility of 4K 120 or Full HD 240 directly from the red video button when in photo mode? I did have a conversation about it with some of our with our team here. I wouldn't have an answer yet anyway on that. But I'll keep trying to follow up, Nick, and see. Yeah, I'll keep following up. Let's see here. Alan, suggestion for future video. There seems to be some confusion about the GH6 dynamic range for stills. Would be great to get some clarification, especially for landscape photography. That probably wouldn't be a full-length video. It's very simple. The dynamic range boost functionality, which is automatically always on, or it turns on when it needs to when you're in the still shooting mode, is automatic for stills. So there's not really anything that I could give anybody as to like the best method to shoot with it. Just know that dynamic range boost is going to give you more highlight dynamic range, not necessarily shadow dynamic range. So it's going to definitely lead more towards overexposing your image and pulling it down than it would be to shoot a normal exposure and have your highlights already well within where the clipping point would be. The biggest thing that you'd really probably be able to see is if you took the same exact shot, that's where you start to lose some of that, the same exact shot with the same exact exposure, you're not going to see a difference. It's when you're pushing your highlights is where you're really going to see it. I believe DP Review made a comment about it when they were first talking about the RAW files, about how much more headroom the RAW file had. to be able to pull. Actually, I think at that point they were talking about the JPEGs. Just how much more highlight room you have for pulling that information back before you have to actually lift your shadows up. So a little bit of a different exposure kind of way to look at it. Let's see here. What's a good lens to use for night photography on the S5? That's actually a very good question. I've loved using my 24mm f1.8. I don't typically do ultra wide landscape at night. I do have that 11mm that I play around with. It's okay. It's a very stylistic look because it's a fisheye lens. You do have to do some correction. But the 24 1.8 I think is an awesome lens for it. I really like the way it handles just star points, things like that. I'm not overly hypercritical on things like chroma. I don't even know enough to properly guide in that area. I just know from my shooting experiences, I really like the 24. If you're looking for something outside of that, or you want something much wider, the 16 to 35 f4 I really do like because it's 16mm. Yes, it's an f4, but the ISO ranges on cameras like the S5 are pretty solid. You've got a nice, good, kind of ISO range to work with. And at that point, I'm typically shooting at 1600 or 3200 ISO anyway. So f4 is usually not too big of a deal. Other than that, there are some other options from the rest of the L-mount alliance that make some pretty good options for ultra wide lenses if you want that. But yeah, there's some pretty good stuff. I like to start, I mean, even if you have the S5 with the 20 to 60mm, the kit lens, that's still perfectly fine to start getting into shooting night sky and general night photography. Full frame, yes, you can start doing faster lenses to where it's like a 1.8, 1.4, things like that. But you do have to remember that you're getting much shallower depth of field if you're coming from micro four thirds. So in some cases, that may not be the best. Yeah, the 20 to 60 is probably the great go-to to start with, and then start expanding in with something like, maybe more niche lenses. Like if we go to this is that 11mm. So I've got that 11mm here. It's an f2.8. It's a nice lens. I really like playing around with it, but to me, the fisheye look starts to get kind of old after a while. So I tend to not really use it as much as I thought I would. So, yeah. Let's see here. Any news about lens roadmaps? I don't have an update about lens roadmaps. The most current information is going to be up on I believe if you go to the L-mount Alliance website, I think there are lens charts up there as to what lenses we've got, what's potentially coming. That'll be the place for the most up-to-date info. You can always also check out the Panasonic Global site to check out for the Lumix stuff. Let's hear. When I change from PAL to NTSC, I lose all my custom frame rate settings. Is there any solution for this as I need to switch between the modes? I'm gonna have to check. If you can let me know which camera you're using. It sounds like it's either gonna be an S1H or a GH5 or a camera that has to switch to NTSC. Let me know which camera because I can probably take a look and see what it is. If the camera's rebooting into NTSC or PAL, that's probably why, because the frequency and the systems are different. Most likely you'd have to set them up independently so that when you make that change, those settings are the same across. Let's see here. S5 doesn't have some of the video candy the S1, S1R has. Any idea to why? And if we will ever get this stuff, higher res recordings, etc. So one of the things with the S5 to remember is that it does not have the same chassis that the S1 or the S1R has. Higher resolution, higher bit rate, higher frame rate options require thermal management to be on point. That's not to say that the S5 is not on point. The S1, S1R, and S1H are just designed much larger so that they can dissipate and absorb a lot more thermals than the S5 can. So one of the trade-offs of going to a smaller camera or a lighter, smaller package is that you do have to take into account that you can't dissipate heat as much as you can with a camera that's got either an integrated cooling system, so like an S1H or a GH6, or even the box cameras, versus a camera that has to do it all passively. So yeah, I mean, even the S1 and the S1R have, when you start going into the higher recording modes, like on the S1R, if you're doing the I think it's 5.4K option on there, it's time limited because that body will still heat up. The sensor and processor still heat up a lot. The S1 has recording time limits when you're in the higher recording options in 4K. Some of that stuff you just can't get around. You either build a camera that runs as close to the ragged edge as you can, which we try to do, but we do it in a way that is reliable. So you're getting as close to that edge, but you're not having to worry about, is the camera going to be able to actually maintain this recording? Or is it going to, in the middle of a shoot, shut down, and then it's going to take me 40 minutes to be able to shoot again? That's kind of why the S5 doesn't have all the same recording options that the S1 or S1R has. The trade-off there, not really trade-off, one of the different ways to look at it, though, is that if you're shooting at normal frame rates, or quote-unquote normal frame rates, 60, 30, 24 frame, you can just plug in an external recorder to that camera, to the S5. You can get Blackmagic RAW, and you can get ProRes RAW. You can get ProRes out over the HDMI. So that can be a nice benefit if time limits are the things that are kind of holding you back a little bit. So definitely take a look at some of those. But most likely the stuff that the S1 and the S1R have are very different than the rest. Like you said, higher res recordings, things like that. They're probably not going to come to an S5 because they wouldn't be reliable. Not reliable. Either the recording times would have to be so short because the thermals to maintain the image quality that our target is, or it's just not, really kind of designed for it. So Martin says, please ask engineers why monitoring LUTs are limited to Vlog and HLG profiles. That is a no-go profile for low light on the GH6. I would say experiment more with Vlog and HLG for low light. They're perfectly fine in low light. They expose differently. Log profiles can definitely work in low light as long as you use the tools that the camera has and know where your highlights are, where the shadow area clips. LUTs typically don't get included, LUT previews for standard color profiles, like standard, natural, vivid, things like that, because those are deliver-ready formats. You're not really going to be grading any of those. So that's usually why you don't see, from pretty much any brand, you don't see LUT previews for things outside of a log or a hybrid log gamma profile. See here. FC, generally speaking, dynamic range is the highest at native ISO. Does dynamic range get reduced linearly as ISO moves away from native ISOs? Not necessarily. Every camera's different. Every brand handles this differently. Dynamic range, if you look at charts and stuff like that, they get plotted. I think you have to look at as many of them as you can to make your own decisions on it. But my understanding is that dynamic range does not scale linearly as you change exposures, because it also depends on if you're in log, if you're not in log, all that kind of stuff. So Andy says, when will the new firmware update come for the GH6? Relatively soon. I don't have a date I can share, so soonish. It's coming. We demoed part of it at NAB, so it's coming. Let's see here. JC, is there a way to configure BGH1 HDMI latency to match EVA 1? Why is it not the same or better on the GH6? So one of the tricks that actually a user pointed out, and this is something that I know Matt and I have brought up with our engineers, if One thing you can try is turning HDMI audio off. If you're not needing the HDMI audio feed, turn that audio off and latency should be reduced. I don't know exactly what the reasoning behind that is, but it has been brought up. We have asked our team about it. And every camera is going to be different. It depends on what the processors are used, how the system's set up to work. So there's going to be little differences that you're going to see between all of these things. The GH6, one thing, I know it sounds like a cop-out, but just remember that the GH6 is the start of an entirely new processor, an entirely new engine that's running this camera. It is literally ground up, brand new from the previous generation. It's used in every other camera that's on the market, that's in our lineup right now. So, some of that stuff, as we, as that system, as that platform matures and we get more and more cameras there and different designs are made up for it, things will change a little bit. But as far as why they're not the same between like the GH6, the EVA 1, or the BGH1, different setups. Like the BGH1 having SDI, where GH6 doesn't. That's one major difference there. The HDMI connections on them. The GH6 is an HDMI 2.1, where I believe the BGH1 is an HDMI 2.0. I know those numbers don't mean as much anymore because now we rate everything on gigabit, not necessarily on the 2 or 2.1 or any of that stuff. So there are little differences, but one of the ways to try to make them get closer is on the box camera. If you don't need audio over HDMI, try disabling it and check again, see if your latency is better. Let's see here. Okay, so you have a GH6. So is when I change from PAL to NTSC, I lose all my custom frame rate settings. Is there any solution for this as I need to switch between modes? So what I would suggest is if you shoot me an email, it'll be up on the end screen here. It's LUMIXLive at us.panasonic.com. If you shoot me an email, I can dig a little bit more into that and see exactly what your particular scenario is when you're changing. Because I'm not sure what custom frame rate settings would be changing. It's a little bit easier to troubleshoot if we do it like over email. Yeah. Let's see here. Okay. Anyone else missing false color on the GH6? Sean said we have to keep asking to get it. It's 100% right. You keep asking. I can't make promises that you'll get it, but know that Matt Fraser and I definitely agree false color would be a really nice thing to have in the camera. I just don't know when or if it can be added. So the more you guys let us know, the more it just helps Matt and I get that message across. So couple last things I wanted to talk about here. So if I change out to my main angle here, like we were saying, with the Lumix Tether software, there's a lot that I think gets overlooked with its general functionality, right? So we already talked about if I have the camera set up as my overhead, and I'll change this back to the main camera. So if I have my camera set up as the overhead, we already talked about you've got those controls right here for power zoom to be able to do wide and tight, get yourself all changed in. You have that ability for your zoom in scale, so I can come through here, see exactly where I am, set up my focus, and if I actually change that angle to there, you'd be able to see it. But one of the other things that was a little bit mentioned before here about wanting to be able to trigger multiple cameras. Well, if I've got a BS1H here, I've got my BS1H there, and then I've got my BGH1 right here, I have the ability with this software, as you can see here on my main camera control here, I have a little green indicator that tells me which camera is active right now, right? So which camera I'm actually changing. And the UI here will tell you that as well. It'll tell you which camera you've got set up. Well, say I wanted to have all of these cameras set up and I need to trigger them because I want to record from all of them. Well, that allows me to just click all cameras, and two things to note here. When you select all cameras, you'll notice that I no longer have menu access up in the top right, so up on this screen here. I no longer have menu access for the cameras because I'm controlling multiples. But what I do have is the ability to just click HDMI rec, and now I've got 3 cameras recording. Well, technically 2 because I don't have an SD card in the other one. So I've got all 3 cameras running, and that means that I have my actual tally lamps on, so I can see that, okay, that camera's running, that camera's rolling, that camera would be rolling. This camera would be rolling if I had an SD card in it. But I'm able to actually control all of this. Now I'm also able to just click stop. All the cameras will stop. And then depending on how I have the camera set up, I can have it prompt me to offload that footage from the camera right to my computer. So that brings me to one of the other, kind of last little pieces with this is I'm going to use this angle because I just think it's a new angle. I haven't used this angle before. So if I've got this, everything all set up here, and I want to be able to go in and tell it where I want to have my files saved, where I want to have video files stored off to, all I end up having to do is just click settings. It brings up this new window here, and this allows me to go in and say, where do I want to have this stuff stored? So for one, I click storage location, and I pick which camera I want to control. So in this case, I'm using the ultra wide angle. So I click this, and then I can also come in here and I can say, do I want this to store just on the memory card? Do I want it to store on the memory card in the PC? Or do I only want to have it store on the PC? So you have to have, you do have to have an SD card in these box cameras to record anything to them, because what it's doing is it's recording it to the card and then it copies it, or transfers it over to the computer. So if I say I want to always have a redundant in the camera and I also want to offload to the PC, I click the memory card plus PC. I can either just set it to where if at least I'm on in Windows, it'll just save to my pictures, or I can go user setting and I have my little setup here to where it's just going to save to test offload. I have the ability to actually have it create folders by dates. I can also come in here and set up my own naming for it. So say camera A, camera B, camera C, start with a certain number, and then I'm set. When I save this and go to save this footage, it ends up being able to just put it into that folder. When it's done recording, you're all set and you've got everything set off there. So let's see here. I see a couple more questions came in. Where were we? When are we going to have a photo editing program 100% Lumix? When are we going to have a photo editing program that's 100% Lumix for Mac? Not sure what you mean, photo editing. Lumix doesn't have our own native software for editing. We have the Tether software, which is really just for control, and you can integrate it into different editing software. But yeah, we don't have our own dedicated editing software, so I don't know if that's something that we would go down to. Let's see here. Strons, GH6 suggestion, record the internal mic to audio tracks 3 and 4 when external mic is plugged in and recording to audio tracks 1 and 2. Okay, so you want internal mic to track 3 and 4 when external mic is plugged in and recording to audio tracks 1 and 2. Well, if you plug a 3.5 millimeter in, I believe that can work. If you have an external, or no, 4-track does require the XLR. So when you have the XLR in, you can use the internal microphones as scratch. I might be missing what you're asking. Yeah, But you have the ability to record those 2 tracks or not record them if you want. When you go into the menu, I don't have my GH6 on me, so I can't pull it over, but I believe it does work. Are there any plans to update the Tether software for compatibility with Apple Silicon? We've asked. Is M1 support gonna like need like a formal update for it? I honestly don't have an answer for you right now. I know right now, it is supported because I think it's what Rosetta 2 handles the information there. But native support may be a little while out. I honestly don't know enough about the software engineering side for the desktop apps. Let's see here. Panasonic releases firmware release the equipment. Not sure I follow what Panasonic release firmware release the equivalent incremental updates and only needs to update hardware. Oh, okay. Now I'm following. Wow. My brain kind of broke trying to read. Yeah, so we typically try to do firmware updates instead of necessarily hardware updates all the time. We think with the hardware that exists, you can get some pretty good mileage out of the hardware, and we build them to be able to be fairly forward compatible for things. All right, well, it's a little after 2 o'clock here in Austin, and I have to actually call it for today. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in and some of the awesome questions that were here and the awesome suggestions. Like always, we will continue to get that information over to our team. We'll continue to be taking this feedback from you guys to help build future, better products or help us understand what the next firmware updates, things like that should be. It's all so incredibly helpful, and hopefully all of you learned something or picked up a little piece of information from here that is helpful for your particular shooting style or environment that you work in. We will be back next week, Thursday at 2 p.m. Next week is actually specifically about Live View Composite. So we're going to be talking about the the S5, the GH5 Mark II, and the, I think, G100 are the 3 cameras I think that I'm going to be working on. So yeah, we'll be talking about that. I'm going to have a little bit of a recorded part of that because I'm going to go out and do some cool stuff as long as the weather stays clear at night to, get you guys some cool shots and show you some cool things to do with it. So if you like the video, you like the content that you got, maybe if you think that we've earned a like, that's huge. If you're not subscribed already, get subscribed. We've got the rest of the month's videos up. We're going to be posting June's streams up this week, actually. So the rest of the calendar is going up. And yeah, we'll be back next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern time. And I hope to have you all join me there. Take care. That's not the right one. That's also not the right one.